Good afternoon. Today I have Book 1, Utopia, written by Sir Thomas More. These are the contents. The first one, the meaning of utopia. Second, author's life. Then Utopia, Book 1, characters. And at the end, there is the conclusion. Now let's begin with our first slide, the meaning, utopia. Utopia comes from two Greek words, utopos, that is good place, and topos, that is no place. So it is ironic and carries a double meaning. Topos, that is no place, means a place which does not exist. The word utopia signifies a desire for a better world. So utopia means a perfect place where each and everything is perfect, be it government, people, society, religion, and where there is happiness all around. It was coined by Thomas More in 1516, and later it became a literary genre. Let me remind you that Plato, the classical Greek philosopher, also wrote about utopia in his book, The Republic. According to Plato, utopia in the Republic, he described an imagined society as better than any existing society, past or present. Let me also remind you here that Plato, the author of The Republic, and Thomas More, the author of Utopia, were equally determined to see radical changes taking place in their respective society. Also, both played the role of political advisor. Plato was a political advisor to Dionysius II of Syracuse and Thomas More to Henry VIII of England after serving as privy councillor and eventually becoming a close advisor of the king in 1520s. Some laws of Plato are present in the book Utopia written by Thomas More. Plato's Republic and the laws provide models for More's reflection on the good citizen and the good state. But More's Utopia is different and blends variety of philosophical influences. In contrast to Plato's Republic, More's society is a communist democracy and not an aristocracy, with communism confined to the ruling elite. So back to the slide. Why did Thomas More write Utopia? Possible reason for writing. Maybe he wrote because he wanted to mend his society, or Thomas More satirizing his society. The book is a framed narrative depicting a fictional island society, which you find it in book 2, and it depicts its religious, social, and political customs, that is, customs. It is a scathing attack of the greed, materialism of the 16th century England. To the next. Well, before I start with the book, let's dig into author's life. He was born in London on 7th February 1477, and his father was an attorney, and Thomas More was raised as a Catholic. He studied at Oxford University, mastering and studying Greek and Latin literature. Then he was admitted to Lincoln's Inn as a law student in 1496. In 1504, More entered Parliament, and King Henry VII was the King of England. After Henry VII's death, he was made Speaker of House of Commons. I think you all know what is House of Commons. If you don't, let me tell you. In the chamber of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, there is the House of Commons, that is the lower house. And we also have the House of Lords, that is the upper house. The Commons is publicly elected. The party with the largest number of members in the House of Commons forms the government, and members of the Commons debate the political issues and for new laws. So, to the slide. After King Henry VIII became the king after his father's death, More became the Councillor of England from 1529 to 1532. But he refused to accept the king as the head of the Church of England. Why is that so? There is again a story behind this. So the king divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and married Anne Boleyn for a male heir, that is for a male son. And at that time, divorcing was against Catholicism. So, More being a Catholic did not support King's decision and resigned. So, in 1532, he resigned from Parliament. He refused his decision to rule the Anglican Church and did not swear the oath of supremacy in 1534. Now again, what is the oath of supremacy? Now, oath of supremacy is when king will be the head of the church, and it means any religious decision can be taken by the king, and Pope, who is the head of Roman Catholicism, will not have the right at the Church of England. Thomas More, being a Catholic, refused the oath of supremacy. So back to the slide. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London and was beheaded in 1535. His last and final words, "The king's good servant, but God's first." He wrote History of King Richard III in Latin and in English between 1513 and 1518, which he considered the first masterpiece of English historiography. Despite remaining unfinished, it influenced historians and writers such as Shakespeare. Now, Utopia, Book 1. Utopia was written by Thomas More in 1516 in Latin and was later translated into English in 1551. The work is divided into two books, in which the first book, is called The Communication of Raphael Hakluyt concerning the best state of a commonwealth, and contains a discussion between Thomas More, Raphael Hakluyt, and Peter Giles as whether or not Hakluyt should offer his services as a counselor to the king. The book starts with a preface in the form of a letter from Thomas More to Peter Giles. Then More relates Raphael's travels and his description of the faulty arrangements of the places he visited, which are later to be contrasted to the Utopian kingdom. It is one of the first books to invoke the analogy between the great voyages of discovery and discoveries of the mind. The second book contains a description of Utopia and all the good laws and orders of the island. Critics see it as a satirical work. Thomas More witnessed the corruption and bad arrangement of the government at that era. Yes, it attacks the greed and materialism, as I mentioned in my first slide. To More, the Utopia meant an opportunity of satirizing the evils of Europe, and particularly the England of his day. So, let's go to the second slide. Now I have the characters. So these are the main characters that are found in Book 1. We have More. He is a fictional character bearing the same name as Utopia's author, and is at service of Henry VIII, King of England. He traveled to Antwerp, Belgium, where he meets Peter Gals and Raphael Hakluyt. Thomas More, the character, doesn't give a transparent mouthpiece of Thomas More, the author. Book 1 is narrated by Thomas More. Now, the author's resemblance to the character doesn't mean the two are the same. Thomas More, the writer of Utopia, is a historical personage, but the character here in the book is a fictional character. Peter Gals, he is an affectionate, loyal, and sincere friend of Thomas More, who helped him to publish Utopia. As a real character, Peter is a native of Antwerp, of high reputation, appointed to a good position, and worthy of the best. Then we have Raphael Hakluyt. He is a fictional character, a philosopher and a traveler who spent 5 years in Utopia, then returned to Europe to spread utopian customs and rules. Hakluyt is a Greek word meaning speaking of nonsense. Then we have Cardinal John Morton. He is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is the real Chancellor of Henry VIII. He met Hakluyt and discussed issues in England in presence of the lawyer. Now I have a quote here from Lyman Tower Sergeant. Actually, okay, let's see what he says. Utopian thinking is essential for our social, political, and psychological health. But, like everything else, utopian thinking is time and place bound. One model does not fit all. So, Lyman Tower Sergeant is an American academic professor of political science at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. He wrote a book, The Utopian Reader, and in it he defines utopianism as the various ways of imagining, creating, or analyzing the ways and means of creating an ideal or alternative society. And the current usage of the term derives from More's Utopia, who created a phonetic pun by combining O, the negating no, not, or none, il, that is good, and topos means place. So the ambiguity of More's neologism, Utopia is a good place, that is no place. So now the preface. It is a letter written by More to Peter Giles. He confesses that he wrote the book Utopia, what he has heard from Raphael Hakluyt in Peter Giles' presence, and apologizes that he wrote it without the consent of Hakluyt. However, he has some doubts about the accuracy of his recollection of one of the details of Hakluyt's account, and asked Peter Giles to edit the book Utopia and correct the mistaken information. More has not made up his mind whether he should publish the work at all because of the disagreeable judgment of men. So now this is a brief summary. The book begins with a short 6-line poem followed by a 4-line poem and a letter of greetings from Thomas More, the author, to his friend Peter Giles. More tells how King Henry VIII of England sends him to Flanders, Belgium, on a diplomatic mission. There he meets a friend, Peter Giles, who introduces him to a Portuguese seaman, Raphael Hakluyt, Greek meaning speaker of nonsense. Hakluyt explains that he has been traveling with an Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. He's an Italian explorer who traveled around the same time as Columbus and gave his name to America. He has discovered an island called Utopia, where the people live in perfectly ordered society. Giles asks Hakluyt why he has not offered his services as an advisor to a king, since any political leader would benefit from hearing what he has to say. Hathloday rejects this idea, saying kings are more interested in making war and acquiring new territories than in learning to govern better those territories they already rule. He has been to England and found the government of that country particularly resistant to improvement. Hathloday recalls that once he was dining with Cardinal John Morton, the Archbishop of Canterbury in England, when an English lawyer praised the condition of English justice regarding thieves who were executed by hanging, but could not understand why so many thieves were still active. Hathloday says no punishment can make someone refrain from theft if it is their only means of survival. He says there are some people in English society who have no choice but to steal, just like disabled war veterans who are too old to learn new trades, the servants of aristocrats who are suddenly without a job if their lord dies or if they fall sick and are turned out. So Hathloday says another class of people who are forced into thievery in England are rural people who are victimized of the growing practice of enclosure of arable land for the grazing of sheep. Wool has become a profitable business in England, and landowners fence it for sheep pasture, often demolishing the houses to make room for more sheep, for cash to flow in. Hence, large population of unemployed and starving agricultural laborers remain jobless. Hathloday would bring in government legislation to regulate the production of wool, forcing the rich to rebuild the villages and turn most of the land back to agriculture. Another class of people who turn to thievery is gamblers. Hathloday says one of the root causes of thievery is poor education. The cardinal asked what punishment Raphael would propose in placing of hanging thieves. Raphael argues that in Christianity, killing one another is forbidden. Hathloday describes a better method of dealing with thieves, which is practiced among the Polylaric people of Persia. These are fictional people. The thieves are made to compensate the victims by confiscating their goods, and the remainder of their possessions is given to their wives and children. They are then made to serve a sentence of community work, are made to hire themselves out to whoever needs work done at a lower rate of pay, etc. Every year, some of those who have shown a good character are released. As a result, he says, vice is destroyed and men preserved, but they are treated in such a manner as to make them see the necessity of being honest. Cardinal Morton is an open-minded and says that it has never tried in England, and he thinks it should be tried on thieves and vagabonds. More mentions Plato's Republic and the idea of a philosopher king, reinforcing his argument with the Greek philosopher Plato's belief that nations will be happy when either philosophers become kings or kings become philosophers. So, Plato in Republic thinks that nations will be happy when either philosophers become kings or kings become philosophers, and this we find it in this book. Moore and Giles are impressed by Hathloday's immense knowledge and ask him why he does not seek employment in the service of a king. Hathloday turns them down, saying he wouldn't do well at court because it condones blind obedience and favoritism based on flattery. rather than performance. Hathloday rejects this idea, saying kings are more interested in making war and acquiring new territories than in learning to govern better those territories they already rule. So the men focus on England during their dialogues. In particular, Hathloday criticizes England for an excessive penal code and an unfair distribution of wealth amongst the population. Thus, the purpose of Book 1 is to establish a worst-case scenario for society, a sharp criticism of English social and political conditions in contemporary 16th century Europe. Now we have the themes. These are the few themes. There are more, but these are the few themes. Let's go to the first one, greed and corruption. More and Peter ask Hathloday to join the council of the king for his knowledge and wisdom, which might be helpful to the council chamber. Hathloday turns them down, saying he wouldn't do well at court because it condones blind obedience and favoritism based on flattery rather than performance. Hathloday rejects this idea, saying kings are more interested in making war and acquiring new territories than in learning to govern better those territories they already rule. Now let me comment here that Henry VIII's court has been described as an area ridden with betrayal, treachery, and deceit. From his brutal and greedy seizure of the monasteries to his enormous appetites for food and women, Henry didn't believe anything should be denied to him. The problems that the medieval English church faced were some of the major reason why the Reformation took place. He was a selfish king, corrupted by greed and lost, with no sense of empathy towards the people. Hathloday believed that greedy noblemen toughened poverty and theft by their illegal wool trade. They used to expel poor farmers from their lands to enlarge sheep breeding, and the farmers were left without lands for agriculture. Now, during the medieval England, wool became big business. There was enormous demand for it, and everyone who owned land raised sheep. As the wool trade increased, which became the backbone and driving force of English economy, the rich began to count their wealth in terms of sheep. The wool trade was a major driver of enclosure. Enclosure means the privatization of common land in English agriculture, which in turn had major social consequences as part of the British agricultural revolution. So Kings Henry VII and Henry VIII fiddled the currency of England, suggested make-believe wars, reviving moth-eaten decayed laws to collect taxes in order to increase their treasury. They work on the judges to twist the laws in the king's favor. Kings and advisors are driven by greed rather than serving the common people. Next we have injustice. In this meeting with Codman Morton, Hathloday criticized the use of execution to punish theft in England. He had given them convincing proof. This way of hanging thieves is beyond the call of justice, he says. No punishment, however severe, can withhold those from robbery who have no other way to eat. He mentioned idle ex-servants and crippled tradesmen who have no craft nor they can farm to gain their food. They were treated as mercenaries to supply the army, who turned to be dangerous to the government. He suggested enabling every man to earn his own living instead of being driven to theft. Hathloday says The aim of punishment is to destroy vices and save men like the polylarid people of Persia. Oh, now we have war. Kings, during those days, seek only to enlarge their kingdoms, either by hook or crook, than to govern their existing ones properly. For example, the war between France and Italy over Milan and Naples. Now let me comment on it. If you have read Richard III by Shakespeare, at the end of the play, Henry VII came to the throne from the Tudor dynasty, defeating Richard III. It was during the time of the reign of Henry Tudor that the age of exploration had begun in Europe. European countries were trying to find sea route to the east by traveling west. Henry VIII came to the throne after his father's death, Henry VII. Henry VIII wanted to make England a stronger power in Europe and fought many battles. Later, he became to be known as being obstinate, self-indulgent, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. So the government back to the slide. The government devised schemes like giving bribes, hiring mercenaries, and buying traitors at unbeatable prices. Hitler found it impossible to give advice to such kings and their counselors, for they would treat him with scorn. He says, philosophy has no access to the courts of princes. Now, poverty and unemployment. According to Hitler, kings intended to drive their people into poverty. Raphael illustrates the seizure of land by oligarchs. Now, oligarchs means a person who is part of a small group holding power in a state. So, Raphael illustrates the seizure of land by oligarchs, the maintenance of a wasteful standing army. Why it is wasteful standing army? Because troops for a foreign expedition during the medieval times, during that time, were raised on an ad hoc basis by its king, and foreign expedition used to get commission while on standby. The practice of gambling, gratuitous ornamentation, are social ills which led to sick society. Moreover, these ills produce subjugated people. So, Hitler says, you create thieves and then punish them for stealing. So, the last slide, conclusion. In conclusion, the contrast between the social and urban utopia of Thomas More and the English society of the 16th century can be used as an excuse to reflect on the concept of utopia as an idea that is not possible to concretize. Book 1 concludes with Hitler inviting them to visit Utopia in order to be more convinced, and the second part explains the perfect, happy world of Utopia. And thank you.